because I wasn't used to the culture. And I was coming from Seattle where nobody takes public transportation, so even that I wasn't used to. Anyway, I get to Korea and I had to take a bus to get one place to the next. The subways were bad enough. But as we were trying to get onto the bus, I was waiting in line and people were trying to get onto the bus. I'm a kind of a big guy, and in Korea it was even more so. Like I couldn't find a shirt that was my size. They would ask me, "What's your size?" and I would give them an equivalent and say, "We don't carry those," right? So people kind of at that time they didn't really bother me. But as I was getting onto the bus, I was trying to get to the bus, waiting in line. Somebody pushed me from the back. Okay, and in the United States they say you have a personal space about 18 inches. So if somebody comes in and kind of comes this a little close to you, maybe New York is a little less, but about 18 inches and they come into your personal zone, you feel a little anxious and you feel a little uncomfortable. In Korea they didn't have that. And as rude as it was, somebody behind me just shoved me. And I was just like, okay, this is the culture. Okay, they can be rude because, I don't like my own people right now, but they can be rude, it's okay. And I'm waiting to get on the bus. I moved a little closer to the person in front of me, but I guess it wasn't close enough because somebody pushed me even harder. And I was kind of like, okay, that's the second time, but so I moved even a little closer, and they pushed me again a third time. And this time I was kind of angry, and I couldn't help it. I was like, who keeps pushing me? This is not right. So I turned around I couldn't help. My fist was in my hand. I turned around, and there was this little grandma, like a little under 5 feet, doing this. Right? I'm like, what the heck is this? Right? And I try to take stock of my situation because I'm not going to swing at a grandma, right? And I realized that's her job. She's a pusher. She's trying to get people to get onto the, to speed up the system and get as many people in like sardines into the thing as fast as they could. And it was really strange. My assessment of the situation is a great wrong has been done. I have been offended. And the only emotional response should be what? Anger and time for vengeance. And I turn around, and not only is it just the grandma, but when I see the bigger picture of what's going on, I'll start to laugh. Okay, I'm in a foreign place, and let her push me into the person in front of me. I surrendered to the situation because I saw what was really going on. That happens a lot, actually. Our emotional responses are very much tied with our assessment, our perspective of what's really, really going on. When we really see the full picture of what's really going on, then we can rightly respond. When we don't see the full picture, and we're caught up in a circumstance, we're caught up in a relationship, we're caught up in something that's going on, many times even our emotional, our thought, and our choices flow out of actually not seeing the big picture. This little description of a shift in my perspective, a shift in my emotion, even a shift in my will where I even allowed her to push me in. That is, in many ways, for me, like a little parable of what worship actually really is. Worship is actually seeing the power of God, who He really is, what He's about to do, and then aligning our hearts in response to that. Okay? I couldn't help but laugh. I couldn't be angry anymore. I couldn't help but laugh because I understood. I saw. And then to surrender and to surrender to what God is doing. That actually is a bigger picture of actually what worship is in the Scriptures. We are going through different basic principles and practices of what it means to walk with God, to have a life with God. That if we don't fully understand and live into these basic principles, we can be aware of so many things and yet be outside the fullness of who God is. So we've been walking through these different things. Last week we talked about prayer and how important that was and how important it is to live a life that's devoted to prayer. This week we're going to talk about what worship is. What is a process? How exactly is worship is? Because sometimes we can kind of think we're worshiping, but we're not. What is worship at its core? And how are we called to worship? How can we worship? Sometimes we don't realize that we think we can't worship because exactly what we're feeling. But God opens the route in the Spirit to call us into a heart and a life of worship. And finally, what is the power of worship? Once we really worship, what effect does it have on those who are with Him, those who are for Him, those who are really authentically worshiping? I'm going to turn us to the book of Revelation, chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. It's the whole of the chapter of Revelation. I'm going to read from the New International Version because I think this is such a clear picture, a pattern of all of this. What worship is, how we can engage in it, as well as the power of worship we can find from this passage. Let's go ahead and read Revelation chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. I'll give you some background as well as walk you through some of these things. Here we go. This is from the New International Version. After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here. I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven, who sat there, and the one who sat with someone sitting on it, and the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian. A rainbow resembling an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. Before the throne 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center, around the throne, there were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion, and the second was like an ox, and the third had a face like a man. The fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and were covered with eyes all around, even under his wings. Day and night, they never stop saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay down their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, O Lord, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." Let me give you a little background in what's going on in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation, if you actually look carefully and rightly understand it, it's actually a book in many ways about worship. It describes a revealing of who Jesus is. That's actually what the book is about. It's not about these scary end times. It is part of that. It's not about all the difficulty that the church is going through. It's part of that too. But the central focus, the very object, the subject and the object of the book of Revelation, you know what it is? It's Jesus. It starts off the revelation of Jesus Christ. And the people who hear it are going to see Jesus. And that's actually what's going on here. John has been suffering. He's been put to exile. This old man has a life sentence of hard work on this island of Patmos. Concerned over the situation of the churches, even over his own life. He's in the midst of just trying to seek out God. In the midst of that, God comes. And as he is worshiping, shows him these visions to reveal to John, and through John to the rest of the churches, this is what really is going on. And if you follow through chapters 1 through 3, John actually sends, he hears and he sends these letters of Jesus speaking to the churches. And you can tell that the churches are not in good shape. In fact, they are really suffering from huge persecution. Their own friends and family, the Jews themselves, some of them, are attacking them. They're taking their goods. They're putting incredible psychological, emotional, physical pressure on them. And they're in incredible persecution. And it's not just the Jews, it's actually the Roman Empire is beginning to see Christianity as a scapegoat, as an enemy. And so they're under incredible persecution from outside. But even from the inside, there's a lot of difficulty. There's not a lack of unity. There's not a fullness of love. There's actually a departure even from the truth in certain of these places. And so John is kind of like freaking out. Man, this is not good. Okay? We are under huge persecution. We have a lot of instability within the church. And in the midst of this, Jesus speaks to him and says, he shows him an open door in heaven, saying, come up here. I want to show you what must take place. This is a great description in some sense of what worship is in some sense. It meets us right when we need, when we don't have the full picture, right when we need to see what God is going to do and who he is. There is an invitation, a summons. The summons is, come up. Let me open the heavens. Come up, and I will show you what must take place. John is given privy to the fact that in just a bit, all of these things are going to happen. Judgment is going to come from heaven to earth. And if you actually watch, there's like 7 seals that are broken, okay? And once the seal is broken, all this stuff happens on earth, okay? Everything happens in heaven and it happens on earth. John is going to be able to see that there are 7 trumpets blown, okay? 7 warnings, and then there's follow through. There are 7 bowls of judgment that are poured out, and then there is follow through. That actually everything that's going to happen happens through what? What happens from heaven to earth. Most people who read that first verse saying, I will show you what things must take place. They think, guess what? If I were, it's kind of like you want to jump ahead. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? How do I get ready for it? What's going to happen? What's the timeline? What's the specific steps? But instead of showing him that, what does Jesus show him? Let me show you. Let me reveal to you what you need to know. What needs to be oriented about as things are going to happen. Guess what? Jesus shows him what? The scene that's happening in heaven right now. No matter how turbulent the church is and his life is, when the door is open, he can see what's really going on. It is a scene of worship. The first thing he sees is what? A throne. Okay? The first thing he sees is the throne. The throne is very symbolic. It's completely symbolic of authority and power and sovereignty. In other words, nobody gets to tell the king who sits on the throne what to do. It's the exact opposite. Okay? The king who sits on the throne represents his absolute authority and power. Whatever he says happens. And we don't really have that in our day and age. Even CEOs these days have to answer to a board. Even the president, the picture of his authority and power is the Oval Office in that big desk, right? So he has to sign these laws and so on and so forth. But even then, you don't have this one person that, in fact, everything hangs upon. But in ancient cultures, when you see a throne, it means what? Nobody can say anything. Whatever comes from that throne is going to happen. John needs to know that even though in the midst of all of this chaos, all this persecution from without, all this instability from within, that guess what? In heaven, there's one who sits on the throne. He sees it. He sees the light that is emanating with different colors, the rainbow. He sees the glory of God and the reminder, the incredible truth that there is one who sits on the throne. And as he sees that, something is happening. That he sees all of the 24 elders who represents kind of the priesthood of man, human beings, circled around. And then in closer circle, he sees four living creatures. That there is a scene of worship. I want to back up a little, and I want to describe really quickly what I think worship is, and I want to use some quotes to help us understand. I'm telling you, this is a scene of worship, and it's going to start with seeing, but I want to first kind of back up a little and give you some quotes. Can you go to my slides? And as a way of saying, what is worship? If this is what worship is, but what is in general what worship is? Because I think sometimes we narrow it down to just singing, just praises, and praises is worship. But worship is more, not less, but more than singing. So I want to walk us through this couple of quotes to kind of lock us into what really is worship. This quote is from Louis Giglio, and his book is called The Air I Breathe, Worship as a Way of Life. It's a great book, very easy read for those of us who don't like really chewy books. It's a well-written, very easy book to digest, and it's got good content. But the way he describes it is worship is simply about value. The simplest definition I can give is this. Worship is our response to what we value most. what is worthwhile. The very word worship means ascribing, investing, declaring, putting hope on what you count as worthy, as valuable. That's what worship is. Okay? And I'm going to try to tie this in just a bit. Because hold on to that description, because it's very simple, but that's actually what worship is. You will worship. Your heart, your mind, your energies will go directed toward that which you value the most in your heart. Here's another quote from Tim Keller. And worship is a response to what you value. Here's another quote that kind of describes that as well. Tim Keller says, worship is seeing what God is worth and then giving him what he's worth. Worship is responding to the value you see in God. You see something. You see the power. You see the glory. You see the grace, the goodness, the beauty of God. And you can't help it. Something begins to emerge in your heart. A response is born. And in your response, that actually is what worship is. Okay? Does that make sense? So the first step is to see. That's what we see here. John, his eyes are open. He's brought into the heavens. He can see the throne of God. And once he sees a very kind of a scene of worship. Something is, I believe, is stirring in John. He needs to see this, that his life and even the church's destiny is not determined by what's on the ground, but what he sees in the heavens. He sees a throne. God is saying, don't you know, no matter what you feel, no matter what you're experiencing, and when I open your eyes, you will know that Jesus is Lord over all. He is still in control. Everything that is going to happen from here on out is actually a result of what he is going to do. They open, the 6 seals, that finalize God's plan. The 7th seal, nobody is found worthy to open except. And they start to cry. John starts to cry because he doesn't see someone who's able to bring God's plan into purpose until he sees that the Lamb comes up and he opens the seal. That's a big part of worship. Seeing who God is. That in fact, all of our circumstances are subject to his sovereignty, his power, his authority. Let's go to the next slide. Another quote from the same book. It says, unless we see God, we cannot worship him. Worship is what spontaneously flows out of us when we come face to face with him. It's the natural response to all of who he is and our uncalculated response to all that he has done. And I want to really kind of help us to lock this in. This is not just physical sight, by the way. It's not like saying, okay, see, I can see you, God. It's like this haze or so on and so forth. This is talking about, because this is John whose eyes, his spiritual eyes are opened up. This is actually a response to the summons where God says, come here. Come to where I am, okay? And I will show you. God actually touches our spiritual eyes, and we get to see him for who he is and what he's done. You know, when I was first saved and when I was coming back to God even after college, worship was so important to me. I don't know what it was. It's just, more than sometimes hearing the word of God, because most of my the preachers that I was listening to, and they weren't very engaging, and in the midst of that, the place where I really connected with God was singing and worship. But the funny part was the songs that were so much like the ones that really gripped my heart. They weren't just the songs that said God loves you and I love God. Those were really good too, but they were the ones that actually connected with the very truths of who God is and what he's done. So when I was singing about the cross, something would just open my heart and I could see God. I could see his faithfulness. When I would sing scriptural songs to talk about who God is, it would just completely open up my spiritual eyes. And no matter what I was going through, that would shift my very perception of what was going on. Worship is actually seeing. It's seeing God is at the center. Okay? I find that a lot of people, when they come to worship, we don't even realize it, but we stumble at the very first step. we think worship is about us. Okay, it's very subtle sometimes. Even though we know it's not about us, we still make it about us. It's about, I need to experience God. I need to feel Him. Okay, I need something. I need to hear from Him for my life circumstances. It's interesting that most of us, when we come to worship, we will choose a church that worships in the style that we like. Okay, so my father's church. He's a choir director, and he's been doing hymns his whole life. A new pastor came to his church, and he's a 70-year-old man, and they had a worship night, and some Korean hip-hop rapster came in, and they had a hip-hop night, and all of these 70-year-old grandmas and grandpas who grew up with hymns, their faces are like, and they're just, oh my gosh, what's going on? And they were angry. Some of the middle-aged ones, they're like, this is kind of nicer, but and it's the kids. Some of the kids are like, oh, this is great. Yeah. So when they went back to a different setting where they actually had a choir, all the older people were like, yeah, this is great. And then all the younger people are like, I don't understand. This is kind of boring. Where's the hip-hop guy? It'll happen over and over and over again. And people don't even realize it, that it's so easy to make worship about us, about how we are being spoken to, how we are being engaged. And this is the grace of God. This is part of His character. He will do whatever it takes to come and meet us. He will come down to where we are. But worship is not about us being on the throne. It's about God being on the throne. He is the ultimate subject, and He is the ultimate object of worship. That's the reason why the praise team, they chose a name, Audience of One. Who is the audience of our worship? Okay? It's not, when the praise team leads, we are not the audience. Okay? We are the worship team. We've got worship team up here, worship team over there. Who is the audience? Where is the worship directed? Who is the center of it? Okay? It's actually God sitting on a throne. If we miss up there, if we don't see God from that vantage point, and we approach worship as this is something where I need to